What was the best, you have no power here, moment you have ever seen? We had an HR lady who was extremely power hungry. She is walking around with the president of the company who flew in from Japan. She rushes him though the warehouse. Just spits out, oh, these are the warehouse guys, we don't have to stop and talk to them. He stops, walks over and starts talking to me about my last vacation. How buying my house went. You could just see her fuming behind him as we talked for almost 45 minutes. I've had multiple meetings with him, we knew each other really well. I don't think he liked her and drug it out on purpose, but I was thrilled to see her just standing there bored as hell. A coworker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas and he was able to upgrade to a first-class seat. We had this bitch sales VP that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant McMansion in the suburbs, and she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first-class seat as she is making her way to coach and asks him how he got that seat. He used points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first-class cabin and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in first class, and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally he tells her she has to go back to her seat, or she will be escorted from the plane. She made a complete ass of herself in front of the whole first-class cabin. I had a rough childhood with a drug addict father. My mom struggled to make ends meet and my first job was paying for the mortgage. After several months of working, again at my first job, I finally had some money to spend on myself and decided to get a computer and a decent internet connection. At the time, the best internet I could buy as part of a dish combo package. I bought a dish and brought it home to install on the house. During this time my dad was still living at home with us, but he was hardly there and my parents had all but separated at that point. My dad promptly asked me what I was doing putting a dish on his house. I let him know that I pay the mortgage now and I make the decisions on what we do with the house. I was young, but it was a very empowering moment for me. When an unhappy client threatens to go hire a better lawyer, they don't seem to get that this isn't a threat when they aren't paying me. In my first apartment, my parents came to visit, and I said, fuck, when I hit my head on the open door of the freezer while standing up from grabbing something from the fridge. My mother said, you can't talk like that in my hoe. And stopped mid-sentence. I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues, so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining, they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. I worked at a movie theater and some customers were adamant that a staff member had stolen their wallet after they dropped it. Turns out that these people just couldn't see and found the wallet once they actually looked for it. They got irate with literally everyone, from the mall security to the managers to the staff. Mall security finally said, get the fuck out, and the customers went, you can't say that. This isn't your theater, we're customers. Mall security guy promptly said, this is my mall, and I can do whatever the fuck I want. New CEO came to our department on the first day of his work. He didn't have a pass card yet and a lower level employee told him that he can't enter without pass card. CEO got upset and ordered a worker to let him in, but the worker insisted, show me the pass card, or you're not entering. And #X200B. Few days later this worker got a bonus. When I was in high school I worked at popular warehouse clubs selling computers on the weekends. I was hired by the store manager via referral of a friend. I loved computers and they thought I'd make a good salesman, so my job was to stay in the computer department and sell computers, nothing else. Well, one of the shift managers didn't like that, and insisted that I needed to go fold clothes for a while. As in, half my damn shift. I told him that the store manager had instructed me never to leave the technology department, but he insisted. This went on for several weeks. The store manager showed up one weekend when both the power trip and shift manager and I were working. The store manager walks up with the shift manager close behind. Store manager slaps a stack of green bar paper, this was a while ago, down onto a shelf and points to some highlighted numbers. He looks at the shift manager and says, do you see this? This is our average technology sales numbers for the weeks you are on shift. See this number over here? This is our average technology sales numbers for weeks you are not. At this point, it would be more cost-effective for me to simply fire you. What do you think of that solution? The guy stammers and stutters like a toddler caught bullying another kid on the playground. Fortunately, the dude wasn't fired, but the store manager made it clear that when I was on shift, I was not to leave the technology department unless I was on break or there was a fire in the store. That shift manager never said another word to me. When I was still a child, I saw how abusive my grandparents were to my parents when they used to stay in their house during their early years of marriage when they were broke. They are forced to accept the abuse and swallow their pride knowing that they're still indebted to them and had nowhere to go. Once they have enough money to leave my grandparents, they moved to a small rented house. My grandparents came for an unannounced visit and berate my dad for living in such a shanty house and how ungrateful he was for leaving their home. My dad was silent until they start blaming my mother for being a wife that brought bad luck to my dad and how she poisons him into moving to a new home. My dad weren't having any of their bile anymore and kicked them out. They stopped talking until my grandfather was dying of leukemia. My mom was the one who persuaded my dad to see him before he passed. When my shitty father kicked me out of the house and then demanded he have access to my bank to control my financial situation, and I got to tell him, "You have no control over me anymore. You set me free when you kicked me out and now you can't do shit." New director. Decides admin should hold a meeting at noon Monday to Friday in the nurses' lunchroom and bar them from entering during that time. Defines it in a group text as a quick win. My response: please help me to understand how this is beneficial to remove the nurses from their lunchroom during lunch break. No response, his peers and higher-ups in on the text. He is then moved to the quality department. Screwed up in so many levels. My parents were yelling at me and then my grandpa walks over and tells them both to sit the fuck down. They both shut the fuck up and sit their ass down on the couch. It was by far the most powerful thing I've ever seen him do. LMAO. When my manager at McDonald's gets into bitch fights with all the aggressive/toxic customers and booting them out the store by calling them all security if they refuse to leave. 15 years ago, I worked for a company in Germany that was bought by a large US company. One of the first actions was a mandatory HR meeting. They used their US PowerPoint deck and guided us through the rules and regulations, although directed by our local HR team to not do that. Here are some of the highlights. Asterisk: we are not allowed to accept tickets for the Super Bowl. Utterly confusion, 90% of the people had never heard of the Super Bowl. A discussion about why we would want to watch that anyways started. Asterisk: we are not allowed to have relationship with anybody from a supplier or within the company. Uproar in the room. Asterisk: this is against the German constitution. What you do in your free time is none of their business. Asterisk: the discussion gets heated, everybody is discussing. The Americans on the line are very confused why. Asterisk: the head of QA finally gets up and shouts, "If I love that woman, nobody will prevent me from dating her." Asterisk: people signed the sheet that they participated and read and understood the presentation with reservations. Asterisk: people start discussing where to sign up for legal expenses insurance. HR refrained from that day from having mandatory global HR meetings. Management tried a couple of other stuff, at will employment, against the law, everybody has a contract, cutting vacation, against the law, canceling bank holidays, against the law. Make people work on vacation days, guess what, against the law, and a couple more. It was a prime example of cultural ignorance and incredible funny. I worked at a grocery store for 5 years putting up with crazy customers and their awful attitudes. At the end of my tenure our store was set to be closed, and for the last month the store was sold to a liquidation company. Meaning we were no longer under our parent company's umbrella and were no longer concerned with retaining customer loyalty. I got to tell customers, no, and respond with every bit of sarcasm and disdain to every Karen I encountered for 1 month until the store officially closed. I already posted one. One more short one. I was about 12 years old, maybe younger. Often had been forced to stay with my mom's friends when she'd go out of town. The father was an abusive prick. He'd do things like make tomatoes every night for dinner knowing I absolutely hated them. For a week. Threw me in a pool when I was small and he knew I couldn't swim. Classic 70s, macho man. He literally tortured me every chance he'd get. As an aside, if you're a kid and your own mother doesn't give a shit how people treat you, it's pretty much open season. Anyway, we went out to dinner one night. Me, my mom, her friends and their kids. We were leaving the restaurant. I don't remember what preceded it, but he said, "Go ahead, tough guy." Hit me as hard as you can right in the gut, thinking I wouldn't do it because I was scared of him. But this was my moment and I knew it. He was a small man, 5 feet 6 inches. I was at least as tall as him already. And as he gave me his shit-eating grin I pulled my fist back and fucking belted him in the gut with every ounce of strength I could muster. He immediately doubled over. He was fucking pissed. He tried to turn it around on me, but his wife shut him up instantly. "You told him to do it. If you weren't ready, it's your fault, not his." One of the most satisfying moments of my life. And one of the last times I had to endure Mr. Tough Guy. When my electricity got shut off and I couldn't submit a claim on their website because I had no power. Not sure if it fits, but during an insanely busy weekend before Christmas, a Karen was complaining to every associate about how messy our store was. The manager had relieved the girl at the fitting room and was helping to hang stuff. Karen pulled her crap and was trying to make a point that we were messy and a horrible place to shop. This manager told her roughly, "Ma'am, we're messy at the moment because we're a popular store. And the biggest reason we're messy is because of women like you who can't be bothered to pick up after themselves. It's not the associates making the mess. It's people like you. Your type have us outnumbered." First time I actually witnessed someone deflate. The guy that I'd gone on a few dates with introduced me to his parents. Things went well, or so I thought. He drives me home, we end up talking and drinking a few beers. I didn't want him on the road with any alcohol in his system, and I enjoyed his company, so we end up hanging out until 3 a.m. His mom starts blowing up his phone, demanding that he comes home, so he drives himself home to find that he's been locked out of his house. His mom said that he can sleep outside, he shouldn't be spending time with someone like me. Still don't know what she meant by that, and that I'm just another stop on the pussy train. He tells her not to talk about me like that, to which she says, "When you're under my roof, I'll say whatever I want about whoever I want." So he picks up his phone, calls me, asks if he can stay at my place for a little while. It's been 7 years, we're engaged, have a dog, a cat, and a happy life. I also plan on throwing some subtle train themes into the wedding/celebration after the end of the plague. My dad is 6 feet 3 inches. I'm 6 feet 10 inches. Sometime in my early teens, I shot past him. Dad was a yeller. Not doing what he thought I should be. No discussion, just yell. But I realized at some point that he wouldn't yell at me if he had to look up while he was doing it. I don't remember what our last argument was about, I just remember that I'd sort of caught on at this point. So I'm in my room in front of the computer, Dad comes in and starts yelling at me. I eventually stand up and start yelling back. Dad makes an excuse to leave. Dad comes back about a half hour later and starts yelling again, but at this point, it's all I can do to not just laugh. I know that the instant I stand up, the argument will end. It actually wound up being really good for our relationship, because Dad realized that he actually had to make valid points, rather than just going into former drill sergeant mode. All I can say is that if you find yourself in a situation where you've got parents whose first response is intimidation or worse, look at how most people who responded eventually got out of the situation. Hang in there, it gets better, and you can find people who will help you if that's what is necessary. Obligatory, not mine, but this video belongs in this thread. This is the best you don't have power here move I have ever seen, lol. She was working for government, has problems sitting with baby on plane, tried to eat the job of air hostess then Uno reverse card lol. I was working a lab assistant shift, I'm a tech, receiving specimens and such, when a doctor phoned the lab. He was very upset that there was a test that was taking far too long in his opinion. I said okay, let's look at it, and asked what the test was. A fungal culture. A fungal culture takes at least 2 weeks to see if anything grows. The patient was in the ER. I politely told him the test was a send out and they generally take about 2 weeks or longer depending on the fungus. He got all huffy and asked why it took so long and is there a way to speed up the process since he wants to discharge the patient. I chuckled a little because this is a common problem with cultures, we're literally waiting for stuff to grow, we can't just make them grow faster. I told him we don't have magical wands that make fungus grow really fast. He then asked for a lab tech because I was just a lab assistant. I then let him know I was in fact a lab tech with experience in microbiology and I can tell him from first-hand experience that fungal cultures are some of the slowest cultures, right up there was AFBs, and assured him that if anything comes of it, we'll let ER know. He didn't really like that, but said fine and hung up. Some White House lady sat at my bar and tried to get a drink without ID. She pulled out her White House ID card which had no DOB. I work at the White House. I told her that her bosses would be very proud of me enforcing their laws when I didn't serve her a drink. Some secretary of some branch of a state agency would go on a power trip and stamp, "Do not copy," on things that she sent to local agencies. Well, I work for an oversight agency and I needed a copy. Locals were terrified so I rolled my eyes and called to explain that the locals and I were basically the same entity. Woman started to have a conniption fit, but she got real quiet when I cut her off and said, "Fine, I'll issue a subpoena. What's your name and job title?" She answered, and the sheriff served her a subpoena for what I wanted. Guess she wasn't used to that. I wasn't good at returning library books when I was a kid. I got lectured by my school librarian about it a lot. Fast forward 20 years and I'm a supervisor at the local public library and my former now retired school librarian goes there. One day I see her sneaking around the front desk instead of coming back to say hi to me, and I immediately figure something's up. I go up to say hi and she acts exasperated and tells me she was trying to avoid me because she had overdue books. So I put on my reading glasses, pulled them down over my nose, and delivered the same lecture she'd given me countless times about being responsible and turning in books on time. That would be a customer we had named Nick. I'll leave his last name out to protect the stupid. He would email us and always CC editor at isomanationalnewspaper.com, and most of his emails were things like, "Nothing fucking works." None of the national newspapers responded. I imagine some underling just rolled his eyes and deleted them. Finally he said, "Fix this in 5 minutes or I cancel." My manager says, "Let me see that email." He responded, "Thank you, I cancelled your account. We don't want customers like you anyway. If you want to contact the media, that's your call. I'll happily provide the months of threatening emails you sent to my staff." He gave us months of headaches over a £45 per quarter account. We definitely didn't need him. Pretty much every time my in-laws come over. For over 20 years they have attempted to dictate how I should live my life, raise my kids, dress, cook, etc. I always just nod and say, "I'll consider that," but not in a genuine way, in a condescending, "fuck you" way. When they press it, I simply say, "You may leave my house now." The first time I had dinner at my parents' house after I got my own apartment. My dad was giving me grief as usual. Finally, I stood up and said, "I don't live here anymore. I don't have to put up with you this way any longer. I'm going home." And walked out. Most liberating moment of my life. My mother trying to force me to do stuff when she came and visited my dad's house. So my uncle is a deputy sheriff, and one time he was at an airport talking to my aunt over the phone in Spanish. Once he got done with his call, some nearby Karen that overheard him went up to him and started demanding to see his green card. Uncle has an accent too, so you can tell he wasn't born in the US. Uncle decides to fuck with her and tells her he doesn't know what a green card is and has never heard of one. She gets more pissed and keeps demanding to see it. He messes with her some more, then eventually he goes, "Well, I don't got a green card, but I got this," then takes out his wallet and shows her his badge. She immediately walked away while my uncle laughed his ass off. I was waiting for a friend to finish work. She worked at a restaurant so fancy they had someone vetting guests at a podium outside. The place was glitzy and the folks were glam, so the great and good would descend in droves. Those with a reservation were sent in, prospective walk-ins had to queue. A car sweeps up, the driver jumps out and holds the door open to unleash a hat and dress. The woman accompanying said finery, a C-list actress from a regional daytime TV show, looked through everyone present and moved to enter. She froze, appalled, when the guest vetter intercepted, asking, "Do you have a reservation?" She mustn't have heard the question because she didn't respond. Instead she drew herself up to the full height of her couture and demanded, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," said the maitre d', back of the queue. Oof. At my university, it was always fun to watch the people who had been high school popular people think that this sort of popularity would just naturally carry over, and that on this campus of thousands, they'd be a big shot or something. Was always fun to see just how many people could not care less about their attention whoring. A while back, I got a job as a popcorn monkey in the local cinema, as a temporary thing while I figured out what the fuck I was doing with my life. There was a supervisor that had worked there since the site opened, around 5 years, who was a total bitch and had had numerous complaints about her from countless staff. In the first week, I nearly quit because of her attitude. As an example, one night I was on a close, and basically cleaned the entirety of the front of house on my own. I stopped to take a drink of water and she marched up to me going, "We don't pay you to stand around drinking, you know," to which I calmly responded that I was thirsty, and needed a drink of water, and if she wanted to tell me I wasn't allowed to have a glass of water then good luck, but I'm pretty sure health and safety would have something to say about that. She huffed about not having had a break all day, which I ignored, cause not my fucking problem, but internally I was put out about it, because it was totally fucking pointless to be such a twat about things. About 2 weeks in I get promoted to supervisor, as I was clearly extremely competent by their usual standards. I could walk and fart at the same time, but she also gets promoted to floor manager, so she continues to work her little power trips and try and lord it over me, and everyone else. For weeks after that, I get another promotion to floor manager, and at this point we're equals, so she can't boss me around anymore. So instead, she tries a different tack, which is to try and lord it over me with her superior knowledge of processes, where to find stuff, etc. My response is to go, saccharine sweet, "Oh thanks. That's so helpful. I mean, you know how things work so much better than me, because you've been here 5 years, and I've only been here 6 weeks. She had a face like a smacked arse. It was delightful, smiley face. X and I were moving out after a breakup. Cleaning out garage. She was being critical of my post-breakup plan of moving in with a coworker until I could find a better place to live, as most options weren't great. I took a deep breath and laughed. This puzzled her. "Why are you laughing?" she asked. I collected myself and said, "Because this is the last time I have to listen to this. You don't get to be critical of anything I ever do, ever again." It was a really great feeling, because I literally thought of the "you have no power here" as I laughed. Woman complained we wouldn't fill her clearly fraudulent C2 prescription, brought the brand new store manager back to the pharmacy to make us fill it. She says you have to fill it. God himself cannot make us fill anything if it fails the checks. No. I told my ex I was getting remarried. He told me he was going to stop me and put a line on my house, which I bought with my money 6 years after the divorce. My son would come home from visitations telling me how his dad was going to stop the wedding and I'd have to pay him all of this money, la-di-da. Get to court. His attorney goes blah 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 for what felt like forever. My lawyer, yes, I had to freaking get one, stands up and simply hands the judge the divorce papers showing the disbursement of funds and how my ex isn't owed anything. Judge looks at ex's lawyer and basically asks, "Did you even ask for this document before filing?" and dismisses the case. My father trying to force a name for our soon-to-be-born child. For all 3 of them. Girl came into my apartment to hang out with my roommate. Demanded that I turn off the football game I was watching so we could focus on her. I literally said to her, "Who the hell do you think you are?" and kept watching the game. She yelled at me and stormed out. Thankfully me and my roommate never saw her again. A museum in a town added to its collection a replica of Michelangelo's famous nude statue, David. The pastor of a nearby church demanded that the curator remove it from display because it was inappropriate for public viewing. To her credit, the museum's curator told the clergyman in unequivocal terms that the church had no say in the matter and that fine art would be exhibited without need for ecclesiastical approval. TLDR: a pair of angry moms threatened legal action if I fired their useless kids. I work for a trampoline park franchise. We opened a sister location that I ran for about a year and a half before moving back to take over the old location. When I got back, a lot needed fixing, but in particular there were 2 teenage employees that had been fired/suspended on numerous occasions. They were generally lazy, rude jackasses that shouldn't have been hired in the first place. Problem was, they both had aggressive helicopter moms that intimidated the manager into rescinding any punishments. Once I came back, I took stock of our employees and had a long talk with the entire leadership team. I learned which employees caused which problems, who was unreliable, who had a regular habit of skipping shifts, texting on shift, etc. I fired about a half dozen that first week, including those 2 I mentioned. That night, both moms called my personal cell to scream at me. Our numbers are listed in the online scheduling tool so employees can find shift covers more easily. They demanded to know why I fired them, threatened to sue, have me arrested, accused me of discrimination against their white middle-class sons, etc. I simply asked, "Is your son over 18? Yes? So you're demanding I illegally release personal information regarding a former adult employee? Bye." Just last week we had another supervisor from a different department come and tell us what he needed, not uncommon in my job, like, "Oh, I need this by this date, but we're super swamped right now," and my coworker said, "Oh, we can probably get to that next week because we are working on another project," and the supervisor said, "This needs to be done now," and my coworker said, "We'll do it in 3 weeks, sorry." And there's really nothing the other supervisor can do. Not me, but a story my dad used to tell me all the time. So my biological grandmother was very emotionally abusive. She was very controlling and tried to keep people within her sphere of influence. There's a reason why my grandfather divorced her. In high school my dad had a job washing airplanes at an airport in our area, which he absolutely loved. He's a huge fan of aircraft in general. He had classes until roughly 10 a.m. and then he'd be off to work until around 10 p.m. It was what he loved. He didn't mind long hours being around aircraft all day. But one day he came home a little too late for his mom's liking. She said she'd take his keys to his motorcycle and that he'd lost privileges to it. The fact of the matter is that he bought the motorcycle himself and he needed it to get to school as well as work. He laughed in her face and she didn't do anything. She couldn't do anything. My homeroom teacher in 10th grade, Mrs. Isaac, was awful. Among other things, she had a curious habit of making cheerful little comments to people about how they're going to hell, will die alone in the street, and other lovely things of this nature. She somehow also got management backing to do pretty much whatever she wanted, giving punishments, changing schedules without asking anyone, and so on. She had this going for several months, until she made one big mistake. According to what I heard, at least, she chirped to the resident math teacher that married women who do not cover their hair go to hell. Said math teacher, of course, was a married woman who did not cover her hair, and did not appreciate this comment. About a week later, Mrs. Isaac decided she is pulling her class from all other classes for a Bible prep marathon. Now, to be fair, there was a big exam coming, but you could say that about most of the other classes, too. She sent a random 7th grader to our English classroom, to tell the teacher that we're being called for a prep marathon. Who is calling? Mrs. Isaac. Oh. In that case, it's a no. We were utterly shocked, and amused, because that's not a thing teachers did. She made a few other attempts, but it seems all of the teachers decided they had enough, and flat out refused to send us to her little prep marathon. The best part came on Thursday the same week. She sent in yet another 7th grader to call us. Except this time, it was math class. Who's calling them? Mrs. Isaac. So it doesn't matter. But Mrs. Isaac said dash. I know. I don't care. My ex was a narcissist and I had learned to basically walk on eggshells in our relationship to try to keep the peace. We had 2 kids and I was a stay-at-home dad who did more than 90% of the parenting. One of the tactics I used with our kids was counting to 3 when they were behaving badly, and if they hadn't shaped up they would go to timeout. Cue forward to our divorce. She had manipulated the courts into granting her educational decision-making for our kids and enrolled them in a school far from me and close to her. I began volunteering at the school to help in class to give me more time with our kids. She called to tell me that she had made the executive decision that I couldn't do that anymore. I told her she had no right to make that decision. She pulled out the education decision-making card, and I told her that gave her no right to tell me what to do on my own time. She started ranting and wouldn't let it go. She had grown accustomed to me just giving in and I wasn't doing that anymore. She started getting really angry and yelling. Without even thinking about it, I just said, 1. She paused for a moment and then started into it again. I said, 2. By that point she got what I was doing, I think, because she took a breath and started a bit more calmly, but then she got to yelling again and I said, 3. And I hung up the phone. She immediately called me back and I ignored the call. She kept trying and I kept ignoring it. 10 minutes later I called her back and we started talking again. She didn't yell, and of course I kept volunteering at my kid's school because I'm a good dad, damn it. Yesterday, HR asked me if I wanted to use my own personal time for punching in 5 minutes late or if I wanted to take a tardy. My response was, I'm not taking shit because I was within the 7 minutes allowed under the resolved class action settlement. Unions are great. When I was in my very early 20s, I learned that my BF had cheated on me for months and the other girl was pregnant and keeping the baby. It was 100% certain and I was so traumatized by this that I broke up with him over the phone in about 15 seconds, without revealing what I knew, and then went hard no contact. I didn't even want to yell at him. I wanted him to cease to exist. About a year later I ended up with a short-term contract with his company that was too good to pass up, so I did my best to avoid him until one day cornered me and started into me, in front of about 6 of his coworkers, about how it was shitty it was we couldn't just be friends, how immature I was to avoid him, and how I couldn't even be, basically civil, to him. I blurted out, congratulations on the birth of your child. Remind me how old the babe is, and ran from the room. His coworkers put 2 and 2 together and I hear he didn't last much longer there. I was a salesman at a wire and cable place. I got a call Friday morning from a tow truck driver freaking out. He needed a replacement cable for his truck ASAP because the weekends were the big business days for him, bragging about the big money in people who leave their cars somewhere overnight because they're too drunk to drive home. He was shitty and rude the whole time we were on the phone. He demanded that the cable be cut and shipped immediately, sent next day air, Saturday delivery, pretty expensive. I rushed his order, ran back to the warehouse to hand it to the manager myself to make sure it could jump in line and get cut before the next day air guy showed up. But we did it, rushed every part of it and got it shipped out in time. Every person involved prioritized this order to get it out to him on time. Tow truck dude calls me back later that afternoon saying he got the truck working and no longer needs the cable. He asks to cancel the order and get a refund. I explained to him that because he had it cut to a specific length, if we were to take it back, there would be a restock fee, because we're not going to be able to resell it until someone needs that exact specific length. I also explained that I can't refund the shipping costs because the order has already been shipped the way he demanded it be sent out. Dude loses his mind. Screaming at me telling me he's going to give the company terrible reviews everywhere and tell all his friends how we're all pieces of shit. There was literally nothing I could do for him. No amount of him being an asshole could uncut and unship that order. I was a registration supervisor in an emergency department. Our manager was out for heart surgery so the manager of a different facility was filling in. She was a righteous cunt who needed everyone to bow to her authority. During a staff meeting she tried to implement a policy that the president of our hospital has specifically rejected. Nothing major, just a process change in how we checked in patients arriving by EMS. This policy worked at her facility but we weren't equipped to implement it. She knew this but thought she was going to force us to do it as a way of showing how it was the better way. After she gave the instructions she said, "Any questions?" My staff all turned and looked at me for a moment, then one of them said, "Is this true, okay?" "No. As you know, we've been told not to do this. Please continue arriving those patients as we have been." The manager flipped out and tried to write me up for insubordination. Took it to the director who knew we weren't allowed to make this change. He shot her down and dismissed my write-up. It was super validating. It also helped me with my staff because they saw that I wouldn't let them or myself be pushed around. Was pulled over by AZDPS and they tried to ticket me for speeding, on a highway smack dab in the middle of an Indian reservation. He asked to see my ID, my registration, and to search my car. All no's. "Okay sir, have a great day." A cop pulled me over at 2 a.m. on my way home from work. He was visibly agitated that I wasn't the drunk driver he was fishing for. I asked him why he pulled me over and he gave me some nonsense about swerving. I told him no I wasn't. He walked away, did a 180 and came back with, "Well, if I searched your car right now, what might I find?" I laughed at him and told him that there was no way I would ever consent to a search. He walked away fuming. My boss calling me at 7 a.m. on a Saturday to ask if I could lay some flooring for a friend of his at nearly half my normal rate. Yeah, hard pass Andy. An old dude asked for my manager as soon as I came out of the back room, while I worked in the men's shoe department at Macy's. I think he was mad he was waiting for help for a while. We were closing so people were cleaning up and there were only 3 employees for the whole floor. Went ahead and called my manager and let him know she was on her way. He said, "SHE? I want to talk to the man in charge." Well, to his dismay, every single manager in our store was a woman, up to even the store manager. He just left. Felt awesome. My manager eventually showed up and we laughed about it. Asterisk edited for clarity. The first time I got to say my house, my rules to my dad after a lifetime of him saying it to me. It felt good. US college prof here. My favorite, "you have no power" moments all have to do with FERPA, a federal regulation that protects the privacy of college-level students. If someone like a parent wants to talk to me about a student's progress in my class, I'm legally not allowed to do so without a waiver, signed by the student, and even then it is mostly optional. I teach, predominantly, freshmen, so I get at least one Karen/Ken parent a year. However, because of FERPA, if they contact me, demanding to talk about their kid's progress, I just say something akin to, "I'm sorry, but according to FERPA regulations, I am legally not allowed to discuss student name, work with you." However, I am more than willing to talk directly to them should they have any questions/problems. I've had 1 or 2 parents try and go over my head, but it is a legal law, so they can't work around it without the student's permission, and that almost never happens. So, these parents come to me, thinking they'll rage their way to what they want, but it is just completely useless because of FERPA. When I was younger and worked at a grocery store, my store did a week where corporate had to work with us every year. This one lady was screaming and complaining that we didn't have some brand of something, and we had the corporate lady standing next to me saying we won't ever carry that brand. Every word of this story is true. My younger sister and I have different dads. Her dad was an alcoholic, abusive asshole to our mom. She left him at Christmas 1981. Christmas 82 rolls around, and they were divorced by then, but he wanted to see his daughter at Christmas, so he came by my grandparents' house for Christmas Eve. We always have a big celebration with food, family, etc. Before we continue, a word about my grandfather. He was a card-carrying badass. Purple Heart in WW2, also fought in Korea, old school NRA, etc. At some point, my sister's dad gets some liquor in him and starts telling my mother, in front of all of us, how he is going to whip her ass and doesn't care who is there, no one's going to stop him. It got dead quiet. Everyone was really on edge. After a few moments, my grandma gave me another present to open. My grandfather just walked out of the room. When he walked back in, he was holding his shotgun at waist level. He looked at my sister's dad dead in the eyes and said, "The only reason I don't put this up your ass and pull the trigger is that my wife just redecorated this room." Pure Eastwood shit. My sister's dad got up and walked out without turning his back to my grandpa. The old man just kept the gun pointed at him until he got in his car and drove off. Then he put the gun up and we enjoyed the rest of our Christmas Eve. I was 6 years old. To say that made an impression on me would be a gigantic understatement. I once had a boss try to give me a disciplinary, 3 months later I may add, for my behavior, as it was noted I was rude to her by several of the group's CEOs in a board meeting. On the disciplinary forms, you both have to write your version of the events and it goes to HR for an adjudication. She did her part and I casually filled in something to the effect of, "The manager continually pressured me into deleting files from our client management system prior to a regulatory audit, which is against the ethical code of our profession and not aligned with my moral standards." I accept I was short with her, but she was trying to force me into performing an illegal activity. I watched her collect up the paper and the color drained from her face. I never did hear from HR. She got fired not long after when I casually mentioned to the CEO in a bar if she remembered the encounter and explained why I may have appeared a little frustrated and upset. By Felicia. I had an elderly lady come into the pharmacy I work at when I was roughly 17. It's a community pharmacy and all the patients and people in the community have been going there a while. They know the owner and he knows them. She was acting really suspicious and terse with the employees, walking around shrinking away from people and shit. I saw her grab something and put it into her purse, a couple things of Robitussin. I walk up to her and say, "Ma'am, I need you to put that back or pay for it, and if you were wanting to sell that or use it to make something, it doesn't even have the right ingredients." I should clarify that this is in Clarksdale, Mississippi, one of the biggest meth and drug abuse places in the country. She acts accosted and starts screaming that I need to unhand her and stop trying to abuse her, and then, "I'm good friends with the owner and when he hears how racist and abusive you are, I hope you learn to be a proper man while finding a new job." So I stayed in front of the door and calmly said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry I've offended you. The owner is here today, actually." She walks back and starts hollering, "Where is Eric? This young man is abusing me." The owner rushed out, looked at me and said, "What happened?" She said, "He accused me of taking medicine," and I looked at the bag. The owner and pharmacist looks at me, then asks her, "Did you take any?" She said, "Mr. Eric, I've known you since I moved here 4 years ago and I don't like this little boy you have working for you. His mama didn't teach him how to treat a lady." To which he said, "I think she did a fine job, she's my wife. Let me see in your bag." I found out my parents wanted to send me to a different secondary school from all my friends, for several reasons that made sense to them, but little lonely me who didn't have many friends was not happy at all to be losing those I had. And then, I found out that not only would I have to start all over again, but this school had lessons, on Saturdays. Well, fuck that. I hated school at that age, weekends were my refuge, and now I was even losing some of that? Nope. I cried, I begged, pleaded, but their minds were set. And then someone let slip that this school had an entrance exam. It wasn't difficult, I was pretty sure I could pass it, but my parents clearly assumed it was a given, clearly having forgotten that I had free will, or assuming that I was so used to doing what I was told that I'd just do it. Wrong. In my very first act of childhood rebellion, aged 11, I went and told them that if they made me do it, I would fail the entrance exam on purpose. You could see that it had not even occurred to them that this could happen. I still remember the moment of pure, unadulterated surprised Pikachu face before the sputtering, shouting, threatening, not violence, just grounding, loss of privileges etc., began. My favorite exchange involved my mum telling me that I would pass that exam and me responding, "No I won't. You can't make me," and rendering her, for one of the first times in our relationship, speechless. The whole thing was as revelatory for them, especially my mum, as it was for me. I learned to stand up for myself, and that I had free will, and they learned that I wasn't some obedient little girl who would participate without question and was not just always going to meekly fall in line. The change of school thing was dropped. I didn't really even get punished too much, because I hadn't actually done anything wrong, and my parents, who may have come off sounding terrible but were in fact wonderful, just unaware of the stubbornness they'd gifted their daughter, felt uneasy about teaching me that exercising free will was wrong, particularly as my mum was a teacher. I wasn't allowed a writing lesson that week, and that was it. Funnily enough, I now think I probably would have been better off changing schools. The reason I didn't have many friends was that I was bullied at school, quiet, academic, wore the most ridiculous glasses, adult-sized, on a 7-year's face, because my sight was so shit that they didn't make lenses the strength I needed in child sizes in the 80s, face with rolling eyes, so a new start in a new school where no one knew me would have been an opportunity to start over. A few years ago I was helping my parents move to a new house locally. My father is fairly particular and told me he has reserved a U-Haul truck for specifically 24 hours as we are going to need to make a few trips across a large metro. I go in to pick the truck up for him, and look at the sheet stating the truck needed to be back in just over 3 hours. We were about 35 minutes late, but that would be okay with 24 hours. I tell the fellow behind the desk that this should be for 24 hours, and he says it is not in the system and it is spoken for already after we return it for another rental. I ask if there is anything we can do, at which time the owner comes over to see what the issue is. I explain it to him and he proceeds to chastise me, saying we must not have ordered it correctly, if we need it so long why are we 35 minutes late, and a bunch of other down talk. By this time my father comes in to see why I have not come out, and also gets talked down to, which upsets me internally. I tell the owner that we need to move at least the big things, so if we only have 3 hours we will make it work the best we can, then rent another truck elsewhere during the week, but he keeps chewing up more time arguing. Then says the kicker. He will look up the call recording to see who is right. I have absolute trust in my father when he says he did something, so I agree and wait. Turns out the owner was the one that took the call and he gets smug. I have done this for 20-some years and I don't make mistakes. 5 minutes later, sounding defeated, he is asking us to bring it back early so we don't mess up another person's move, guilting us for his mistake that he never makes. On the call you clearly hear my father asking for the 24-hour rental with multiple confirmations from the owner throughout the call. Guy was a real jerk, never even apologized for anything. Also left a lengthy detailed review on multiple sites and emailed U-Haul corporate. It is now my most helpful review on just about every platform. My abusive ex who tried to keep me from leaving. Saying I'd never see my son, harassing me, whatever else you could think of. Finally one day I walked out, and she demanded I give her my phone since she paid for it. Something finally snapped and I told her I didn't need her. She didn't drive, she didn't have an income that could sustain herself, she didn't have a car, she didn't even have family to rely on. Her own mother kicked her out when she was pregnant. So I said fine, keep the phone and lose the only person who has helped you in any way. We're broken up and I have my son 50% of the time. All her threats are empty and I just kinda ignore her when she starts being abusive towards me,